Look at the nerve of this insolent kid. He thinks he can bargain his father's freedom with childish words." The laughter echoed through the wide hall like mocking thunder. The air smelled of lamp smoke and sweat, and the metallic sound of chains clinked in the background, where a thin, worn-out man was shackled. The father, head lowered, rough hands locked in heavy cuffs. He didn't dare raise his eyes. His body couldn't bear so many weeks of humiliation. But the son, skinny in plain clothes, skin darkened by the sun and hard work, lifted his voice without a shake. "Let my father go, and I'll heal you." A short silence sliced the air, as if the words had dropped like a stone on everyone's ears. Then the hall shook with roaring laughter. Big men in fine clothes pounded the tables, pointed fingers, and laughed without mercy. Even the servants paused to laugh. "This boy has lost his mind," one shouted, wiping tears from laughing so hard. "Heel! You, a ragged brat!" mocked another, leaning forward to show his yellowed teeth. "And you still dare set conditions?" added the chief, a man with a cold gaze, sitting in an ornate chair, a heavy ring gleaming on his finger. The boy didn't step back. His dark eyes faced every man before him. "Yes, free my father, and I'll prove it." The father, voice choked, tried to stop him. "Son, be quiet. Don't do this." But the boy didn't listen. He knew this was the only moment he had everyone's attention. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest, but his resolve burned stronger than his fear. The crowd began to murmur. Some whispered madness. Others called it blasphemy. Most, though, wanted to watch the boy fall. What could be more entertaining than seeing a poor child daring to stand against powerful men? The chief leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. "So you're telling me, if I release this useless old man, you'll do something no one else here can? You'll pull off a miracle?" "I will," answered the boy, his gaze steady. The laughter returned, louder this time. Some doubled over in amusement. One man jeered, "Bring a sick man to this kid. Let's see what he does. Maybe sing a tune or blow air in his face." Another, crueler, added, "And when he fails, I'll see if he still dares raise his eyes." The father wept in silence. Tears slid down his weary face. He knew this would only deepen his shame. "My son will be ridiculed," he thought. "I don't want him to suffer what I already endure every day." And yet, a spark of hope, faint as a hidden ember, began to flicker inside him. What if the boy held something no one expected? Meanwhile, the rich men were already turning the hall into a stage. Servants rushed about, tables were pushed aside, everyone eager to see the show. The boy stood in the center, breathing deep, ignoring insults and laughter. "Look at this," the chief declared, rising. "We've got a show better than any feast." The prisoner's son offering healing in exchange for his father's freedom. The crowd exploded with jeers, shouts, and laughter. Yet behind each laugh, there was a trace of curiosity. The boy drew another breath. His legs trembled, but he refused to show weakness. With each mocking laugh, he remembered his father's pain in the darkness of the cell. With each insult, he recalled the nights he swore never to abandon his family. At that moment, it didn't matter how many powerful men stood before him. It didn't matter the weight of humiliation or the risk of being branded a fool. He had only one choice: to face them. And so, before all their scorn, the boy repeated, his voice firm and clear, echoing larger than his small frame. "Let my father go, and I'll show you it's not laughter you'll hear, but silence before the impossible." The laughter waned. The challenge had been made, and even among the jeers, the seed of doubt began to sprout. The hall still pulsed with leftover chuckles when the back door creaked open, showing the damp corridor leading to the cells. The smell of rust, mold, and worn flesh drifted out like an old breath. Beyond the cruel party of the powerful lay the rotting heart of the city, the debtor's prison, where men were more numbers than names and misery had its own ledger. The boy's father was one of those numbers. They called him Elias, but in the records he was Debtor 47B. He had ended up there not for vice, not for lust, not for crime, but for a rare stubbornness, refusing to accept the unfair price of grain in a year of drought. They sold promises. He bought hope. They sold deadlines. He paid with sweat. They sold forgiveness. He rejected kneeling. And for that defiance, saying no to men who memorized sentences and made up laws, they locked him away. The city was named High Meadow, a pretty name for a place where heads always bowed low. Built between two hills, squeezed by a narrow river, it looked like a place that worked hard but barely slept. To the south, spinners wove life into threads. To the west, blacksmiths drew music from iron. To the east, farmers counted clouds to guess their harvest. But that year, the clouds had moved on. The ground cracked, the water twisted in taste, and a fever of weakness began to spread, first among children, then the elderly, and finally the strong, who thought themselves unbreakable. They said the sickness started in the hands. The skin dried, strength faded, fists no longer closed. Then it climbed into the arms, shrank the chest, tied the breath with thin cords. Those with wealth bought potions, those with little bought silence. Almost everyone bought fear. It was in this climate that Elias fell. Months earlier, he had organized something they mockingly called the Sack Union. Small farmers pooling what little they had into one warehouse, selling together, receiving fair pay. The city saw this as an insult to the chief's house. The same heavy-fingered, easy-laughing man who now laughed at the boy. A single delay in paying a promise written on the wrong paper, and suddenly the word fraud spread like currency. The leader of the union, the man who taught others not to bow to the first offer, was shackled without ceremony, paraded before the crowd as an example of what happens when you dream too big with empty pockets. The boy watched it all. He saw his father shoved by guards, saw the calloused hands, hands that shaped tools and broke bread, locked as if they were claws. That same day, someone whispered in his ear, "That's what happens when you defy the ones in charge." He learned the taste of rage, salt and blood. From then on, every morning, the boy woke with the same sound in his chest, a slow, steady hammer that reminded him of the prison corridor. He passed by his father's empty workshop, like someone walking past the shrouded body of a loved one, without the courage to look. The stacked wood, the tools hanging, the marks of ash on the wall. Everything still, everything silent. Only the rumor of disease moved, each day inventing new faces. Women whispered the sickness lived in the water. Men swore it came from dust. The chief, ruling, said it came from lack of discipline, and that obedience was the cure. He ordered barriers in the market, shrank the fares, charged fees for sanitary protection. Whoever didn't pay was left outside, exposed to wind and luck. Some died without paying. Many paid without living. On this ground of mistrust, the boy began to notice what no one else did. The illness had a pattern, like knots in a rope. Those who worked in the stifling warehouses fell first. Those who drank from the shallow well on Thread Street sickened more. Those who rested in the drying shed, where the smoke whitened the air, sometimes improved after a few hours away. He didn't have names for it. He didn't say fungus, vapors, germs. He said it as he knew: thick air makes you sick, still water brings fever. A wet cloth on the forehead cools the fire. The morning sun helps. Salt water tames the weakness. He was a craftsman's son, but in silence he learned from the world, like someone listening to a language without a teacher. In the afternoons, while the city argued over costly cures, he walked to the higher river, where the current refused dirt, and watched. Leaves carried downstream stayed clean. Leaves that stopped clumped, rotted, and trapped others. Still water holds sickness, he repeated to himself. He began boiling water at home, tending to his mother, visiting neighbors. He brought clean cloths, steady hands, patience. He told them to open windows, break tiles to let in light, pull beds away from walls so air could pass. Some got better, and those who improved spread the word: the prisoner's boy has a healing hand. Others scoffed: a good hand is money, the rest is prayer. This whispered fame didn't reach the hall of the powerful, or if it did, they chose to turn it into a target. The chief had a habit of confusing usefulness with threat. Whenever someone helped without his permission, he called it danger. Whenever someone rose without giving him a share, he called it crime. So when he heard of a boy moving through the city easing fevers without paying the health protection toll, the chief discovered two things he hated: limit and shadow. He chose to drag the boy into the light, not to see, but to blind. The summons came with irony. Appear in the hall for clarification. On the way, the boy crossed streets where people, behind curtains, wondered if he was a saint or a fool. He faced stares mixed with pity and curiosity, and as he entered, he found his father at the back, head bowed, eyes begging, "Go back." Then the laughter began. It wasn't about him, not yet. It was about what he represented: humble boldness, fearless persistence from someone unaware of his own danger. They laughed as if chasing a stray animal from a barn, clapping to scare it off. But claps scare birds, not silent storms. "Speak, boy," asked the chief, once the hall had tired of its own mockery. "What do you think you can cure? Poverty, thirst, defiance, or this stubborn fever that won't obey commands?" The boy traced in his mind the map of the city, the shallow well on Thread Street, the houses with nailed-shut windows, the shed where sweet smoke stuck in the throat. He saw faces: the woman who improved after opening her roof, the old man who breathed again after hot steam, the child who stopped shivering when boiled water became rule at home. And most of all, he saw his father's hands, able to unlock chains with skill, not force. The body is a gate too, he thought, and the right touch opens it. "Bring someone in need," he said, more to himself than to them, "and let the wind come through." More laughter. They mocked the word wind as if it were superstition. They laughed at his soft tone, his worn-out clothes, his lack of books. They laughed because they didn't know what to do with someone who asked for nothing but a chance. While they laughed, something small was happening outside. A group of women, mothers and grandmothers who had seen fevers ease in their homes came closer to the entrance. They weren't welcome in the hall, but fear can lend courage where law denies passage. One held the hand of a pale boy, breathing short with cracked lips. Another carried a baby, burning hot, heavy as lead. They had come because word had spread that the prisoner's boy was summoned, and when word spreads, hope dares to walk. In the dark corner, the father tried once more. "Son, please," but the chief raised his hand, like taming a dog, and silence fell. He leaned back, savoring his own authority. He didn't realize that silencing the father only gave the son the stage. That was the moment the incident that would change the city began, not with a crash, but with a breath. The main door, poorly closed, gave way to an unexpected gust, and the lamplight flickered. One of the guards, annoyed, ran to bolt it shut, but the street was already there. The murmur of women, the rasping breath of the pale boy, the tired cry of the baby. Real life, with its smells and urgencies, invaded the theater of power. "Who let these people in?" growled the chief. No one answered. Because no one needs permission for despair, the women, humble yet steady, formed a corridor of courage. The pale boy stumbled a few steps and dropped to his knees, gasping. The baby let out a cry that broke off as if for lack of air. The hall, once proud of being untouchable, now leaked, and in that tear in the fabric of arrogance, the boy saw his chance. "Start with them," he said, pointing, "and open the windows." A timid laugh tried to rise from the corner but died without applause. There was something in his voice, not a shout, not a plea, that called for action and carried weight. It was the voice of someone bracing the gate while others pushed against it. "Open the windows," he repeated, slow and firm. The guards hesitated. They weren't used to obeying someone without a ring. The chief opened his mouth to deny, but the balance in the room had shifted. The pale boy on the floor, the broken breathing, the flickering lamps, the whispers from outside, a whole city gasping for air. Authority that ignores need turns into parody, and parody cannot keep silence. One window was forced open unwillingly by a servant. The wind truly entered, cool, smelling of wet stone, though no rain had fallen. The lamps wavered again. The proud curtains seemed to bow. The boy walked to the sick child and knelt. "Boiled warm water, a clean cloth," he said without turning, "and move the lamps from this side, let the air through." "This isn't a kitchen," someone mocked, weakly, as if trying to revive the old joke. No one laughed. While they waited for the water, the boy took the sick child's hand and counted 1, 2, 3. Not magic numbers, but beats to steady his own calm. The child's chest heaved in jolts. The boy's did not. When strength is lacking, you lend rhythm. He inhaled slowly, inviting the other to follow. Mother and grandmother watched with hooked eyes. If he failed, the weight of shame would double. If it worked, laughter would not be enough to hold back the tide. The cloth arrived, the water too, steaming gently. The boy tested it with the back of his hand, a gesture no one had taught him, perhaps learned when caring for his mother's old fevers. He placed the cloth on the child's chest, just above the sternum, and held it. He repeated the breathing count, asked for the third window to be opened. The wind made a current. "And the baby?" one of the women asked, pressing the child to her chest. "Turn the head to the side, keep the neck free," he guided, "and don't smother with blankets. Warm cloth on the forehead only. If he sweats, don't startle him." For a minute, the scene stretched like a rope about to snap. The chief cleared his throat to remind the world he was still there. The father, motionless, closed his eyes and moved his lips without sound. The boy on the floor kept counting in silence. From afar, it could look like prayer. From near, it was pulse. The sick child's breathing began to ease. It didn't vanish, too soon for miracles, but it left panic and found a path. The chest no longer fought the air. It welcomed it. The boy opened his eyes, lips no longer purple. The grandmother, holding his hand, let a tear fall, and afraid of breaking some rule against crying here, hid her feeling in her scarf. No one clapped, not yet, but laughter was dead. And when laughter dies of shame, silence is reborn from respect. "This proves nothing," the chief spat, like throwing a stone in water to break a reflection. "It's luck, and luck doesn't break iron." The boy raised his face, still holding the child's hand. "Luck doesn't open windows. People do." The chief bit down on his own pride, tasting rust, and the city, represented there by a few open windows and 2 lives on the edge, understood that sometimes the first miracle is not healing. It is to make the powerful listen. Outside, someone, no one knew who, began to spread the news. The prisoner's boy opened the hall's windows. In High Meadow, where life was lived behind heavy doors, that phrase sounded like blasphemy. For that very reason, it spread quickly. The inciting spark was complete. Sickness had entered the hall. The wind had entered through the windows. The city had entered the conversation. The boy didn't step back. The father could no longer beg him to stop. And the chief, for the first time in ages, realized that authority without air also faints. The next step was inevitable, to prove it wasn't chance, and every proof would carry a price. In weariness, in fear, in risk. The boy knew. The chief knew too. And in that silent understanding, a war began that no one could see, yet everyone felt. On one side, laughter turning to anger. On the other, shame turning to focus. The city, outside, waited for the verdict with ears pressed against the door. And the boy, inside, was preparing to ask for more than windows, to make the iron on his father's wrists start doubting itself. The silence in the hall was no longer the same. At first, it was silence of disdain, the kind that precedes mockery. Now, it was silence of restraint, as if all were breathing deeper after watching the pale boy find his breath again. No one would say it aloud, but doubt was already in the room. The chief, uneasy, struck his heavy ring on the table, trying to take back command. "Enough of this show!" he shouted. "One easier breath isn't a cure. What you did here, any breeze could do." The boy, still kneeling by the sick child, lifted his dark eyes and spoke firmly. "I said I could help, and I can do more. But my price is still the same. My father's freedom. The words were like stones hurled at glass. Many looked at each other. The boldness hadn't shrunk. It had grown. The father, chained at the back, pulled against the irons, face twisted with worry. "No, son," he cried. "Don't say that again." The chief smiled, a cold smile that never reached his eyes. "You are stubborn, boy. You want to bargain with me like a man. But understand, here I set the terms." He gestured, and two guards dragged in a frail man, carried almost by his shoulders. His body looked more shadow than flesh, eyes sunken, breath failing. Everyone knew him, a wealthy merchant who, ironically, had been struck down in the height of the sickness. "Very well," said the chief, his tone triumphant. "If you, boy, can bring life back to this man before all here, then I'll consider your request." The people laughed again, but it came forced, short, as if they didn't even believe their own words. The merchant was one of the most spoken cases in the city. No medicine had helped him, and all thought him already lost. The father wept. "Don't accept," he pleaded, his voice tearing the air. "They only want to use you as a show." The boy, however, didn't look away. He studied the sick man, drew a deep breath, and replied, "Bring boiled water, clean cloths, and let the wind keep moving. And prepare to wait. This doesn't happen in minutes." The hall buzzed. "Wait!" It sounded like defiance. People wanted something instant, a trick, a flash. But the boy offered no magic. He offered process. The chief, with disdain, snapped his fingers and ordered the servants to comply. He did it because he was certain the boy would fail, and nothing would delight him more than to watch it happen in front of all. While they prepared what was asked, every gaze turned toward the boy like arrows. Some hoped for failure, to prove the world couldn't be shaken by someone so small. Others silently hoped it would work, because if it did, there might be hope for their own. The father, still in chains, trembled in fear. In his mind, his son would be crushed under the weight of disbelief, yet inside him a spark of pride began to grow. The boy didn't yield. Even before men who ruled the city, even before scorn, he stood firm. The merchant was laid on a rough mat. His breath was shallow, dragging. The boy knelt beside him, placed a hand on his chest, and asked for silence. For the first time, no one dared to laugh. "Go on, boy. Show us what you can do," someone shouted from the back, trying to revive the old mockery. But the voice rang out of place, as if it no longer belonged there. The boy began giving instructions. "Remove the heavy blankets. He needs to breathe. Open the windows wider, and take down those thick curtains. The sunlight must come in." Guards and servants hesitated, then obeyed. Slowly the room shifted. Air flowed, light poured in. The stifling weight lifted. Some whispered to each other. They had never thought of something so simple. The boy asked for boiled water and prepared cloths to cool the sick man's forehead and chest. He asked them to raise his head slightly to ease the breathing. Each step looked plain, yet there was precision in how he did it. It was no accident. "This is no cure," barked the chief, desperate to restore the laughter slipping away. "It's boys' play, a stage trick." But no one answered. All eyes stayed fixed. After some minutes, the merchant's breathing eased a little. He wasn't healed, but there was relief, a clear change. His chest no longer fought the air so violently. A murmur ran through the hall. Eyes that once brimmed with mockery now carried a shadow of respect. Hands that had pounded tables in laughter were now clasped together, uneasy. The boy looked at the chief and said slowly, "It isn't me who works miracles. It's life itself defending when we give it what it needs." The phrase struck like lightning. Some repeated it softly, trying to grasp its weight. The father, chained at the back, shut his eyes and wept in silence. These tears were no longer of shame, but of disbelief mixed with hope. The chief, red with fury, slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "This proves nothing! If you want your father's freedom so badly, you'll have to do more, much more." But everyone had already seen enough. The seed was planted. No one would forget the moment when a boy with plain words and steady hands dared to challenge the logic of power. There, before them all, the first turning point took shape. The boy, once ridiculed, was transforming laughter into silence, scorn into doubt, disbelief into faith. The spectacle was no longer of him falling, but of the shock in seeing him still standing. The hall was different now. The air no longer carried the weight of roaring laughter, but the weight of uncertainty. The merchant lying on the mat, once thought surrendered to fate, breathed more evenly. The flush in his face was returning slowly, like embers reigniting, and that unsettled them. Most of all, it unsettled the chief, who felt his authority slipping through his fingers like sand. He needed to take back control, to twist what everyone had witnessed into illusion. He could not allow a boy, a prisoner's son, to steer the room. "Don't be fooled!" he shouted, suddenly rising. The ring on his finger slammed against the wood. "What you see here is no miracle, no cure. It's coincidence. Coincidence and luck." Some, still uncomfortable, tried to laugh, but the sound came fragile, false. Others, however, clung to his words like shipwrecked men to driftwood. They needed to believe nothing had changed, that the world was still the same, that order was not about to be overturned. The chief went on, his voice echoing. "Will you really believe that a filthy boy, uneducated, untrained, can do what even our doctors cannot? Will you trade the wisdom of scholars for the superstitions of a desperate child?" His words were venom. The murmur rose again, this time carrying doubt. Some shook their heads in disapproval. Others whispered, "It's true. Maybe it was just luck." The boy, still kneeling, slowly rose to his feet. His dark eyes, once blazing with certainty, now met resistance in every direction. He felt the crowd's weight pressing him down again, but he did not retreat. "It wasn't luck," he said, voice calm yet steady. "It was choice. I asked to open the windows. I asked for boiled water. I asked for light. None of this is luck. It's care. It's attention." The chief cut him off. "Care, attention," he scoffed. "And for that you want me to free a prisoner? Because his son waved rags and air?" The room burst into nervous laughter. Not laughter of joy, but of fear. Fear of believing the boy and being punished. Fear of defying the chief. Fear of admitting that perhaps, just perhaps, the logic of power was flawed. The father, still in chains, shouted in despair, "Enough! Leave my son alone! He's just a boy! Don't turn him into a show!" But his voice was drowned by the chorus of mockery rising again. They called the boy a fraud, a witch, a trickster. Some, crueler, suggested he had arranged everything with the women who brought the sick. "Of course," one noble sneered. "It's all staged. This boy must have slipped them herbs before, and now pretends it was his doing." Another chimed in, "I bet if we bring someone truly at death's door, he'll fail like the imposter he is." The chorus grew louder. The hall turned into a court of mockery, and as in every unjust court, the verdict seemed already written. The boy would be declared a fraud, stripped of courage, humiliated until nothing was left. The boy drew a deep breath. His throat burned, his heart pounded hard. He could hear the insults, feel the stares scorching his skin. But inside him, the image of his father in chains burned stronger than any jeer. "Bring whoever you want," he said, voice steady even among the jeers. "I won't back down." The chief smiled. It wasn't humor, but cruelty. "Very well," he snapped his fingers. "Bring the gravest case. I want everyone to watch this theater collapse before my eyes." Guards rushed out. Soon they returned with a makeshift stretcher. Upon it lay a woman, so thin and frail she looked like a breath about to vanish. Her lips were purple, her breathing shallow, her skin marked with fever. Everyone knew her, one of the oldest seamstresses in the city. The hall fell silent. No one laughed now, no one dared. She was already considered lost, and that was why she had been chosen, the perfect case to shatter the boy's credibility. The father cried out again, desperate, "Son, no, they want to destroy you!" But the boy stepped forward. He felt the weight of every gaze and the heavier weight of his father's heart begging him not to risk it. He looked at his father, chained and frail, and answered only with his eyes, "I cannot stop now." The woman was placed before him. The silence was so thick one could hear her labored breathing. The boy knelt beside her, placed his hand on her burning forehead and whispered, "No one is a lost cause." The chief stepped forward with a cruel smile. "Then show us, boy. Show everyone what your defiance is worth." The laughter didn't return. Now the entire hall was bound to the scene. Some waited for his failure. Others quietly prayed for the impossible. The boy knew this moment wasn't just about proving something. It was about deciding his father's fate. It was about turning laughter into silence, silence into respect, and respect into freedom. The woman was laid on the cold floor in full view. Her eyes barely opened, her hands were icy, and her breath came in shallow gasps as though her body had already given up. Some in the hall turned away, unable to face it. Others whispered, "She won't last the night. That boy will ruin himself." The chief, arms crossed, wore a smile of certain victory. To him, this was the end of the boy's insolence. The boy knelt by the seamstress. He was so close he could feel the fever's heat rising from her skin. His father's words still echoed, "Don't do this." But he knew he could not retreat. His father's freedom was tied to what would happen here. He drew a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, then said, "I need all the windows on this side open. She needs air. And bring boiled water, clean cloth, and salt." A murmur swept the hall. "Salt?" someone mocked. "Is he seasoning death?" Laughter flickered here and there, but it no longer had the same strength. The scene was too heavy for long jeers. Two servants obeyed, though reluctantly. The windows opened, and a current of air cut through the stifling room. The boy asked them to raise her head slightly and remove the heavy cloth suffocating her. He himself pulled away a dirty rag from her chest and replaced it with a clean one dipped in hot water. Calmly, he moistened her lips with drops of salted water. "Her body is losing everything through the fever's sweat," he explained, his voice low but steady. "Without salt, water alone won't hold life." Some exchanged looks. His words weren't from books, but from observation. They were simple, and for that very reason, no one had thought of them. The woman groaned faintly, but her breathing found rhythm. The boy stayed steady, changing cloths, wiping sweat, speaking softly as if coaxing life itself. "Hold on. Breathe with me. The air will come." The crowd watched with wide eyes. Even those who mocked couldn't look away. The chief drummed his fingers, restless. After minutes that felt like hours, something shifted. Her chest, once trapped in shallow gasps, began to move with more regularity. It wasn't full recovery, but it was improvement. Her face, once purple, now showed a faint flush of color. One guard muttered without meaning to, "She's different, breathing better." The hall heard it, and the silence that followed was deafening. The boy kept working, clean cloth, fresh air, measured water, no tricks, no shouts, no promises, only patient care, and the results were plain to see. A woman in the crowd, who knew the seamstress, began to cry softly. She was finished, and now, she couldn't finish. The seamstress's eyes opened, still weak but alive. She looked around, confused, tried to speak. No sound came, but her lips shaped the word, "water." The boy smiled faintly, tired, and gave her a few more drops. At that instant the hall breathed as one. Everyone knew her body was returning. The chief leapt up, furious. "Trickery!" he roared, clinging to what little control remained. "Just luck again." Sometimes fever breaks on its own, but the crowd was no longer with him. Many looked at the boy with respect, others with disbelief. The laughter that had once filled the hall had turned into uneasy silence. At the back, the father wept. But these tears were different. They weren't of shame or fear, they were of pride. For the first time in weeks, his heart felt he wasn't alone. The boy rose, face shining with sweat, and said firmly, "You may call it luck. You may call it chance. But you cannot deny what you saw. She breathes easier. She came back. And if you want more proof, bring whoever you want. I will not stop." His words echoed through the hall. They weren't arrogance, but conviction, and everyone knew the truth was before their eyes. The boy had made the impossible seem simple. The seamstress opened her eyes again, weak but alive. And in that instant, all felt, some with hope, others with dread, that the boy was no longer a source of laughter. He was a force to be feared. The hall felt changed. The mold and smoke still lingered, but there was something new in the air, a heavy silence, the kind that weighs more than shouts. The seamstress, once declared lost, now breathing better, her eyes open as living proof that something had happened before them all. But this something could not be accepted by the chief. It couldn't. To acknowledge the boy's deed would be to admit his own authority was not absolute. So he rose, slamming his heavy hands on the table, and spoke with a harsh voice. "It's still not enough." His eyes burned with fury. "One case proves nothing. You think miracles just happen like this? I want to see if this boy can hold out when truly tested." He gestured sharply. The guards left and minutes later returned, dragging another patient. A younger man, but in far worse shape. He coughed non-stop, spitting blood into crumpled cloths. His eyes were hollow, his body thin, his chest looked ready to split with each spasm. The crowd stirred. "He won't manage!" "That one already has a foot in the grave." At the back, the father cried out, his voice trembling. "Son, you don't need to go on! You've done enough! They only want to destroy you!" But the boy didn't flinch. His dark eyes locked onto the sick man brought forward. He drew a deep breath, as if pulling courage from a hidden place. "Put him near the window. He needs air," he ordered firmly. The guards obeyed, though muttering. Their confidence wasn't what it had been. The boy arranged the space, asked for clean cloths, boiled water again. He knew this case would be harder. The man spat blood. The sickness ran deeper. Kneeling at his side, the boy placed a hand on his back. "Slowly," he whispered. "Let's ease the cough first." The chief, laughing in scorn, shouted for all to hear, "Let's see now! If this boy saves someone spitting blood, I'll kneel before him myself." The hall erupted in murmurs. Many laughed nervously. Others stared, waiting for the impossible. Ignoring the jeers, the boy asked for a bowl of hot water. He soaked a clean cloth, laid it on the man's chest. Then he asked for embers in a small container, threw in dried leaves with a strong scent, and had the man breathe the rising steam. "This will open his breathing," he explained, steadying the frail body. The man coughed harder, spitting more blood. Some shouted, "He'll die right here! Stop this sham!" But the boy stayed calm. "Let him! He needs to force out what's trapped." Minutes dragged like hours. With every cough, the man's body seemed closer to breaking. The chief smiled, convinced the end was near. But then, slowly, the rhythm of the cough eased. The man still struggled, yes, but no longer with that desperate choke. The steam was clearing his chest, opening him bit by bit. The crowd watched, stunned. "He's improving," someone whispered. "Impossible." The man opened his eyes and gripped the boy's hand as if begging him not to stop. The boy only nodded, keeping his work steady. At the back, the father wept again. But now, with tears of pride, seeing his son carry a weight no man in the city dared to bear. Still, the chief would not yield. He barked again. "Bring another! One more! Let's see how far this fraud can last!" The guards left and returned with the child. Small, thin, burning with fever. Her eyes glowed with heat, her skin slick with sweat. The hall fell silent. To bring a child seemed too cruel, yet no one dared oppose the chief. The boy froze for a moment, his eyes filled with tears. He looked at his father, then at the child, and said softly, "I'll help her too." He knelt, asked them to remove the heavy blanket smothering her. He gave her drops of boiled water, let fresh air touch her skin. Slowly, the fever seemed to drop, sweat ran freely, and her breathing grew lighter. The hall held its breath. No one laughed now. What had been spectacle turned into reverent silence. The boy was no longer mockery. He was hope or threat, but he was exhausted. Sweat streamed down his face, his arms shook. His small body was wearing thin. Each patient was a battle, each doubting stare a weight across his back. Still, he did not retreat. "Another," he said, voice faltering but firm. "I can go on." The chief ground his teeth. He didn't know whether to laugh or fear. "Then let's see how far your insolence goes, boy." And so, before them all, the trial became an ascent. The more he healed, the more cases they brought. The more he proved, the more they demanded. The boy, weaker each time, fought against his own exhaustion. But with every fever eased, every breath restored, the crowd saw the impossible unfold before their eyes. The hall, once a stage for humiliation, had become an arena of endurance. And the boy, alone, faced not only the sickness, but the will of a man who could not bear to lose. At the back, the father no longer begged him to stop. Now, in tears, he whispered over and over, "Hold on, my son, hold on." The hall was no longer the same. The place once echoing with cruel laughter now pulsed with silence. No more jeers on their lips, only eyes fixed on every move of the boy. He had eased a child's fever, brought air back to a man's spitting blood, pulled a seamstress from the edge of death. But with every victory, instead of granting his father freedom, they only piled more weight on his shoulders. The boy was exhausted. His small body shook, his arms felt like iron weights. His face had gone pale, beads of sweat dripping from his chin. Even so, he did not retreat. With every breath, it seemed he carried not only his father on his shoulders, but the whole city watching him. The chief, unsettled by how things had turned, knew he needed one final blow, something that would crush all hope. His narrow eyes glimmered with cruelty as he ordered, "Bring the old man from cell 3. A murmur swept the hall. The old man from cell 3 was known to all. A man broken by age, sickness, and years of prison. He could no longer walk, barely spoke, and his skin was so thin, it looked like paper torn by time. Many said he was already dead in life. 2 guards carried him on a makeshift stretcher. His body looked too light, as if each bone might shatter like glass. The silence grew heavier still. Even those who wished to see the boy fail swallowed hard. This wasn't a test anymore, it was cruelty. The father, chained in the back, cried out in despair, "Enough, this is inhuman. You'll kill my son." But the chief ignored him. Arms crossed, he spoke with the tone of a judge. "If the boy is what he claims, then prove it now. Heal the old man from cell 3. If he fails, everyone will know he's nothing but a fraud." The boy looked at the old man. His heart tightened. This case was different. The others still had fight left in them, but this body was already tired of life. For a moment, doubt cut into his mind like a sharp blade. What if I can't? His knees wavered. He thought of the chief's laughter, the noble's mockery, the weight of failing before them all. Tears welled in his eyes. And then his father spoke, his voice firm despite his weakness. "Son, look at me." The boy lifted his gaze. His father, though bound in chains, raised his head with effort. "You've already set me free," he said, tears running down his face. "Even in prison, I've never felt so free as I do now, watching your courage." Those words pierced the boy like fire. His doubt turned to flame, his fear to strength. He drew a deep breath, wiped his tears on the back of his hand, and knelt before the old man. "I don't promise eternal life," he said, voice steady, "but I promise to fight for every breath." The chief laughed, trying to break the moment. "A fine speech, but words don't heal. Show us, boy." The boy began his work. He asked them to open the windows wider, to put out the nearby lamps, letting the night wind flow through. He laid warm cloths on the old man's chest, gently massaged his cold hands, whispering softly for him to follow his breathing. The hall held its breath. Some wept quietly. Others closed their eyes, as though praying without admitting it. The chief kept his smile, but his hands trembled slightly on the chair's arms. The old man was slow to respond. His breathing was little more than a thread. The boy felt the weight of defeat drawing near, yet he did not stop. He persisted, steady and patient, like one coaxing a dying flame back to light. And then, after long minutes that felt eternal, the old man coughed. A weak cough, almost a sigh, but it was enough. His chest lifted a little stronger. Air entered more clearly. His eyes, once shut, opened slowly. The hall erupted in murmurs. His eyes opened. The old man breathed. Some dropped to their knees, others covered their mouths in shock. The scene was undeniable. The boy had pulled even that forgotten body back from the edge of death. The father wept openly, tears soaking the stone floor. The chief, in turn, sat frozen. His smile was gone, replaced by a hollow stare, as though his own authority had taken a mortal blow. The boy, exhausted, could hardly stand, but he lifted his head, looked straight at the chief, and said in a hoarse voice, "I didn't do this for you. I did it for him, for everyone you call disposable." The silence was absolute. For the first time, the chief had no quick reply. The laughter that had ruled the hall was buried. In its place, something new had been born: respect, fear, and hope. In that instant, the emotional turning point struck. The boy, once mocked, now stood as a symbol of something greater, and no one in that hall would ever forget what they had seen: a frail, exhausted child facing the impossible and winning. The old man from cell 3 still breathed with difficulty, but he breathed. And that simple rise and fall of his chest, impossible minutes earlier, shattered the wall of disbelief. The impossible stood before their eyes, but the chief would not accept it. His eyes burned with rage. With every breath saved, every spark of life pulled back from death, his authority cracked. He could not allow the boy to turn silence into faith. He slammed his fist on the table so hard the cups shook. "Enough of these cheap tricks," he roared. "I will choose the next myself. And if you fail, boy, your father will not only remain a prisoner, he will be punished before everyone." A shiver ran through the crowd. No one dared protest. The guards obeyed the chief's command and vanished into the dark corridor. The father groaned in despair, pulling at his chains until his wrists bled. "Son, don't do anything more. Please, stop. They'll kill you." But the boy, even drained, drew in a deep breath and answered, "If I stop now, father, they win," and we both remained chained. The hall froze in suspense. Minutes later, the guards returned carrying a figure that made many catch their breath. It was the youngest daughter of one of the nobles, a girl of about 10, unconscious, her body burning with fever. Her father, the same noble who had laughed alongside the chief, followed behind them, his face shattered with despair. "No!" he cried, rushing toward the child. "Not her!" The chief, smiling with cruelty, replied, "If the boy is what he claims, then prove it now, or your daughter dies before us all." The hall erupted in shouts. Some called the chief insane. Others begged him not to risk the child's life. But he didn't back down. He needed to crush the boy once and for all. The noble fell to his knees before the chief, tears streaming down. "Please, not her. She's my daughter." "Then be silent and watch," came the cold reply. The boy looked at the girl. His heart pounded. He had faced fevers, coughs, and bodies at death's door. But this child carried the weight of the climax. Every eye was on her. If he failed, there would be no excuse. If he succeeded, no one would dare laugh again. He knelt by her side. Her face was flushed, her lips dry, her small body trembling in spasms. She breathed irregularly, as if each gasp were her last. The boy shut his eyes, blocking out the noise around him, focusing only on the faint sound of her breath. "I need silence," he said, firm. The hall obeyed. Even the chief, burning with cruel curiosity, stilled. The boy asked for boiling water, clean cloths, and a bowl with embers. He mixed simple herbs with a fresh scent, set them on the embers, and let the steam rise. He held the girl's hand, murmuring, "Breathe with me. You can do this." But she did not respond. Desperation thickened in the room. Her father sobbed, clutching his clothes. The chief smiled in triumph. "Look!" he declared. "The miracle worker has failed. The show is over." The crowd began to murmur. The boy felt the weight of defeat brush against his skin. For a moment, doubt attacked him like a beast. What if this time it's too late? Then he heard his father's voice, even from afar, even bound in chains. "Son, remember, no one is a lost cause while they still breathe." The words set his mind aflame. He steadied himself. He leaned closer to the girl's face, blew the steam gently toward her, shifted her head to ease the flow of air. He rubbed her small hands, coaxing warmth back into her veins. Minutes dragged like hours. The hall was suspended in time. And then, the impossible. The girl coughed, weak but real. Soon after, her breath caught rhythm, still uneven but alive. Her eyes opened slowly, glowing with fragile life. Her father collapsed to his knees, crying aloud, "My daughter! My daughter!" The hall exploded in cries of wonder. People embraced, some wept, others covered their mouths in shock. The impossible had happened before their eyes. The chief, however, stood frozen. His cruel smile had turned into a mask of fury and fear. He knew he had lost. The boy, exhausted, barely managed to rise. His arms shook, his legs faltered. Yet he found the strength to lift his head and stare straight at the chief. "Release my father," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "You laughed, but now you know." Silence struck like a hammer. No one laughed. No one dared. The chief gave no answer, only clenched fists, unable to accept what his eyes had witnessed. The whole city, embodied in that hall, knew. This was the peak, the climax. The instant when a boy, mocked and ridiculed, had turned jeers into reverence. The hall hung in suspension. The silence was so deep one could hear the snap of flames in the lamps, and even the rattle of the chain binding the father at the back. The girl, thought Lost, now breathed with open eyes, held tightly in her noble father's arms, who sobbed uncaring of who watched. The chief, stiff in his ornate chair, kept his fists clenched. His face burned red with rage, though his mask of control still lingered. He had to strike back. He had to twist this miracle into weakness. "Do not be fooled," he roared, leaping to his feet. "This is no cure. It's deception." He merely delayed the inevitable. By tomorrow these saved ones will be corpses. But his words found no echo. The people, once partners in laughter, now stared in silence. There was no mockery left, only tearful eyes and disbelief turning into faith. The chief, whose voice once filled the chamber, now sounded as if shouting into an empty well. The boy, still kneeling, still holding the girl's hand, was drained. Yet he lifted his head, his voice faint but clear. "Call it trickery, call it chance. But no one here will forget what they saw. They breathe, they live, and my father is still in chains." Every gaze turned to the back of the hall. Elias, the father, slumped against the shackles, sobbing openly. His thin body shook, but his eyes burned with a light unseen for years. The chief, desperate, slammed his fist again. "Guards, bring the iron! I want the old man punished right here, in front of everyone!" A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Even the guards hesitated. One glanced at the other, too afraid to move. The chief, noticing their hesitation, roared, "Obey, or you'll rot in the dungeon as well." But before the guards could take a step, a firm voice rose from the middle of the crowd. It was the girl's father, still on his knees, clutching his daughter in his arms. "No one touches this man." The hall shook. He was a noble, a man of rank, whose word carried weight. More than that, he was a father who had just received his daughter back from the hands of the boy. The chief turned, incredulous. "How dare you defy me?" The noble stood, still holding his daughter, and shouted, "Didn't you see what we all saw? This boy saved my child. He saved those everyone had already given up for dead, and all he asked was his father's freedom. You no longer have the right to deny it." Others began to join in, first timid, then stronger. "He's right. The boy didn't lie. We saw it. Free his father." The pressure grew like a wave. The chief tried to smother it, but his voice no longer ruled. He barked orders, but the guards stood frozen, staring at the boy with silent respect. Then, from the back, Elias spoke. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I don't need anyone to fight for me. I'm already free, because today I saw my son face you all and win." His words thundered through the hall. The people were moved. Some dropped to their knees, others wept. The chief, desperate, tried to give the final order. "Silence! He stays a prisoner until I say otherwise." But in that moment, one of the guards, driven by the weight of the scene, walked to the back of the hall. His hands trembled, but they held the key to the shackles. In silence, he knelt before Elias and unlocked the chains. The metallic clatter rang out like a bell of freedom. The father collapsed to his knees, free, and rushed to embrace his son. The boy, exhausted, could barely stand, but opened his arms and let himself be held. Father and son wept together before everyone. The crowd erupted in cheers and shouts. Some clapped, others raised their arms. The chief tried to shout, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the people. For the first time, his authority was broken. He tried to step forward, but the girl's father, now resolute, stood in his way. "It's over. You no longer rule here." Today, everyone saw who the true leader is. The chief, pale, looked around and realized he was alone. None of his allies stood with him. None of the guards moved. Every gaze was fixed on the boy and the freed father. The boy, still clinging to his father, lifted his head and said, "I didn't come to take anyone's place. I just wanted my father back. But you laughed, doubted, and now you know life doesn't bow to arrogance." The words fell like a sentence. The chief stepped back, swallowing his rage, and in that moment he lost more than power. He lost respect. The people drew closer, forming a circle around father and son. In the center stood not only two freed men, but a symbol that faith, courage, and persistence could shatter chains heavier than iron. And the chief, unable to respond, retreated into the shadows. His laughter, once cruel and loud, was dead. The echo of iron hitting stone still lingered in everyone's memory. The father, free at last, held his son with the strength of someone who had just recovered his own heart after years of absence. The boy, drained, melted into his father's embrace. That hug said more than speeches. It wasn't just a prisoner freed. It was a family restored before an entire city. The people couldn't contain themselves. Men, women, even the humblest servants stepped forward, forming a protective circle around them. Some wept openly, others only shook their heads in silence, unable to explain what they had witnessed. The father of the healed girl was the first to speak out loud, breaking the reverent hush. "This boy saved lives before our eyes. He saved my daughter when neither doctors nor wealth could. Anyone who dares call him a fraud denies the truth." A chorus of voices followed. "He said it and he did it." They mocked him, humiliated him, yet he never backed down. "This boy has more honor than all of us together." Each word was a stone hurled at the crumbling wall of the chief's authority. Each voice was another brick torn down. The chief in the corner still tried to stand tall. His eyes burned, his body shook, but no one listened anymore. His shouts had shrunk to whispers against the roar of the crowd. Elias, the father, still holding his son, raised his voice, weak but full of feeling. "I spent months in chains, branded a criminal. Today, before you all, my son set me free. Not with force, but with courage. Not with weapons, but with faith." The people began to clap. Applause rolled across the stone hall like thunder of liberation. The boy, unwittingly, became the center of reverence. Some knelt before him, others touched his shoulders in gratitude, yet he did not raise his chin in pride. Instead, he kept his eyes low, almost shy. "Don't bow to me. I only did what had to be done. If each of us cares for those beside us, no one will ever need miracles again." The simple words struck deep. They were nothing like the chief's speeches, always laced with threats and commands. These were words born from the heart of someone who wanted no power, only fairness. At that moment, change began to take shape. Those who had laughed now turned their eyes away in shame. Those who had mocked felt the sting of guilt. Those who had doubted realized they had stayed silent out of fear. And everyone knew Nothing would ever return to the way it was. The girl's father stepped toward the chief and spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "Until today, we obeyed out of fear, but fear died tonight. You've lost respect. And when respect is gone, no throne, no crown, no ring can hold power together." The chief staggered back, pale, trying to keep composure. But each retreating step was an unspoken confession of defeat. His face, once the image of authority, was now only a broken mask. Meanwhile, a few men came forward to stand beside the boy and his father. One, a well-known farmer, said, "From this day forward, you won't stand alone. If they try to touch you, they'll have to get through all of us first." His words drew loud applause. The people, once hushed by fear, now raised their voices in unity. The boy had lit a flame that could not be put out. Elias, tears running down his cheeks, placed a hand on his son's head and said, "You didn't just set me free, my son. You set us all free." The entire city understood. Something profound had shifted. The boy, once an object of ridicule, had become a symbol of defiance, and the father, once mocked as a debtor, was now honored as an example of dignity. Outside, the news was already racing through the narrow streets. Women whispered to each other, "He healed the girl. They freed the father before everyone. The chief doesn't rule like before." The change wasn't confined to the hall. It spread like fire through dry straw, reaching every corner of the city. The boy, exhausted, could barely stand. But seeing his father free and the people united, he knew every drop of sweat, every tear, every insult had been worth it. He had shown that a destiny isn't written by laughter at your expense, but by the courage to remain standing when everyone expects you to fall. And that night, Varzia Alta didn't just gain a hero, it gained a new way of seeing itself. The next morning, the city was no longer the same. The sun rose, as it always had, slipping over crooked rooftops and warming the narrow river, but the air carried something new, hope. The story of what had happened in the hall spread through the stone streets like a gust of wind. People retold the scenes as if they'd been there, even those who hadn't. Each voice added details, but all agreed on one point. A boy, the son of a prisoner, had stood against power, healed lives, and freed his father in front of everyone. In humble homes, mothers told their children, "He wasn't afraid, and look what he did." In the markets, men muttered, "If a boy had the courage, then so can we." The impact was clear. Doors once bolted out of fear now stood open to the breeze. Windows once nailed shut to hide sickness were unfastened to let the sun in. People began boiling water, airing out their homes, caring for each other. What had once been the secret of one boy spread as common practice. And with these new habits came something deeper. Fear began to lose its grip. The guards, once so quick to obey cruel orders, now hesitated. They walked the streets with lowered heads. Some even avoided the people's eyes. No longer monsters, they looked like men who had stayed silent too long. Some muttered excuses. "We were only following orders." But no one accepted that, because that night everyone had seen. Even a guard could choose. The chief locked himself away in his grand house behind heavy curtains and barred doors. The man who once strutted the streets in arrogance now feared stepping outside. Whispers were everywhere. "He's lost respect. He no longer rules anyone's heart." Meanwhile, the boy walked the streets beside his father. Wherever he passed, people looked at him with reverence. Some knelt, others simply touched his shoulder in thanks. He didn't smile with pride, but with humility. He always said the same thing: "I didn't do it alone. Life only needs space to defend itself." Elias, once mocked as a debtor, was now treated as a man of honor. Those who had branded him a traitor now turned away in shame. Many came seeking forgiveness, others offered help to rebuild his workshop, but he only replied, "I don't need gold or glory. I have my son. That's enough." The city had changed. People began to organize, to question unfair taxes, to refuse humiliations they had once endured in silence. The nobles, once untouchable, were now challenged in markets, in streets, even in the squares. There was no violence, only voice, a voice born from the courage of a boy who dared to speak when all others stayed quiet. The children felt it too. They ran through the streets playing at healing each other, copying the boy's gesture of pressing damp cloths to their friends' foreheads. They laughed, but deep down they were learning. You don't have to be big to make a difference. And among the elders, the stories grew stronger. They spoke of the night when laughter died and silence became respect. The simple words struck deep. They were nothing like the chief's speeches, always laced with threats and commands. These were words born from the heart of someone who wanted no power, only fairness. At that moment, change began to take shape. Those who had laughed now turned their eyes away in shame. Those who had mocked felt the sting of guilt. Those who had doubted realized they had stayed silent out of fear. And everyone knew nothing would ever return to the way it was. The girl's father stepped toward the chief and spoke loudly enough for all to hear, "Until today we obeyed out of fear, but fear died tonight. You've lost respect, and when respect is gone, no throne, no crown, no ring can hold power together." The chief staggered back, pale, trying to keep composure, but each retreating step was an unspoken confession of defeat. His face, once the image of authority, was now only a broken mask. Meanwhile, a few men came forward to stand beside the boy and his father. One, a well-known farmer, said, "From this day forward, you won't stand alone. If they try to touch you, they'll have to get through all of us first." His words drew loud applause. The people, once hushed by fear, now raised their voices in unity. The boy had lit a flame that could not be put out. Elias, tears running down his cheeks, placed a hand on his son's head and said, "You didn't just set me free, my son. You set us all free." The entire city understood. Something profound had shifted. The boy, once an object of ridicule, had become a symbol of defiance. And the father, once mocked as a debtor, was now honored as an example of dignity. Outside, the news was already racing through the narrow streets. Women whispered to each other, "He healed the girl. They freed the father before everyone. The chief doesn't rule like before." The change wasn't confined to the hall. It spread like fire through dry straw, reaching every corner of the city. The boy, exhausted, could barely stand. But seeing his father free, and the people united, he knew every drop of sweat, every tear, every insult had been worth it. He had shown that a destiny isn't written by laughter at your expense, but by the courage to remain standing when everyone expects you to fall. And that night, Várzea Alta didn't just gain a hero, it gained a new way of seeing itself. The next morning, the city was no longer the same. The sun rose as it always had, slipping over crooked rooftops and warming the narrow river, but the air carried something new, hope. The story of what had happened in the hall spread through the stone streets like a gust of wind. People retold the scenes as if they'd been there, even those who hadn't. Each voice added details, but all agreed on one point. A boy, the son of a prisoner, had stood against power, healed lives, and freed his father in front of everyone. In humble homes, mothers told their children, "He wasn't afraid, and look what he did." In the markets, men muttered, "If a boy had the courage, then so can we." The impact was clear. Doors once bolted out of fear now stood open to the breeze. Windows once nailed shut to hide sickness were unfastened to let the sun in. People began boiling water, airing out their homes, caring for each other. What had once been the secret of one boy spread as common practice. And with these new habits came something deeper. Fear began to lose its grip. The guards, once so quick to obey cruel orders, now hesitated. They walked the streets with lowered heads. Some even avoided the people's eyes. No longer monsters, they looked like men who had stayed silent too long. Some muttered excuses. "We were only following orders." But no one accepted that, because that night everyone had seen, even a guard could choose. The chief locked himself away in his grand house, behind heavy curtains and barred doors. The man who once strutted the streets in arrogance now feared stepping outside. Whispers were everywhere. "He's lost respect." He no longer rules anyone's heart. Meanwhile, the boy walked the streets beside his father. Wherever he passed, people looked at him with reverence. Some knelt, others simply touched his shoulder in thanks. He didn't smile with pride, but with humility. He always said the same thing: "I didn't do it alone. Life only needs space to defend itself." Elias, once mocked as a debtor, was now treated as a man of honor. Those who had branded him a traitor now turned away in shame. Many came seeking forgiveness, others offered help to rebuild his workshop, but he only replied, "I don't need gold or glory. I have my son. That's enough." The city had changed. People began to organize, to question unfair taxes, to refuse humiliations they had once endured in silence. The nobles, once untouchable, were now challenged in markets, in streets, even in the squares. There was no violence, only voice. A voice born from the courage of a boy who dared to speak when all others stayed quiet. The children felt it too. They ran through the streets playing at healing each other, copying the boy's gesture of pressing damp cloths to their friends' foreheads. They laughed, but deep down they were learning. You don't have to be big to make a difference. And among the elders, the stories grew stronger. They spoke of the night when laughter died and silence became respect. And with every retelling, the legend grew. The boy was no longer just Elias's son. He had become a symbol of something greater: faith against mockery, courage against fear. The chief still tried in secret to claw back control. He sent messages, spread rumors, claimed what had happened was just coincidence. But no one believed him anymore. Eyes don't lie, and everyone had seen. The greatest change, however, was inside the people. For the first time in many years, the city realized it didn't need heavy rings or shouted orders to feel safe. They discovered that unity was stronger than oppression, and that a boy could indeed defeat a giant. Nights were no longer marked by fear. Families gathered not to cry, but to tell stories. Stories of faith, of courage, of defiance. And at the center of them all was the phrase that would echo forever: "Let my father go, and I will heal you." The people understood. That was not just a son's plea. It was the cry of everyone still in chains, visible or hidden. It was the voice of an entire city demanding life in the face of death, justice in the face of arrogance. And so Varzea Alta was never the same again. The hall now stood empty. The lamps burned low. The echo of shouts dissolved into the night's silence. But even without a soul inside, that place would never be the same. Every stone, every fallen shackle would hold the memory of what happened there. The death of ridicule, the birth of faith, the triumph of freedom. Outside, the city pulsed with whispers. People repeated, almost like a prayer, the phrase that had started it all: "Let my father go, and I will heal you." What once seemed madness was now a symbol. It wasn't just about a father and a son. It was about everyone chained by sickness, by fear, by injustice. It was about those who, when mocked, chose to stand firm instead of bowing their heads. Elias, walking slowly down the street, felt freedom weigh more than chains. But it was a good weight, the weight of honor. Beside him, his son, exhausted but with his head held high, was no longer seen as just a boy, but as the voice of an entire city. Mothers began teaching their children that courage isn't measured by the size of the body, but by the size of the soul. Men learned they didn't need wealthy leaders to defend their homes. The example was right before them: simple, humble, real. The elders began to tell the story as legend, and maybe it was, because legend isn't a lie. Legend is truth refusing to die. And the chief, he disappeared into the crowd that once worshipped him. His ring no longer shone, his chair was no longer a throne. He discovered in the cruelest way that power without respect is nothing but dead weight. He became a shadow, a bitter reminder that arrogance always meets the day it falls. The boy, however, asked for no crown, no title. He kept walking the streets, helping whoever needed, always repeating, "It isn't a miracle. It's care. Life only needs room to defend itself." And so the greatest lesson was etched forever. You don't have to be big to change destiny. You don't need strength to break chains. You only need to believe that the impossible is impossible until the moment someone small decides to try. The laughter that echoed that night still lives in the memory of the people, but not as ridicule. It lives as proof that mockery is always swallowed by the silence of respect. No one ever dared laugh at the boy again, because everyone knew it was exactly when they laughed that the miracle happened. In the end, the whole city learned never to dismiss someone's faith, because what seems naive today might be what saves lives tomorrow. What seems small today may be the flame that lights a crowd. And the final phrase, repeated for generations, did not come from the chief, nor the nobles, nor the doctors. It came from a frail boy, the son of a prisoner, who dared to lift his eyes and challenge the impossible. Never mock another's faith, for the miracle you scorn may be the very one that saves you. Now it's your turn. What would you do if you were in that boy's place? Would you have the courage to speak, even while being ridiculed? Or would you stay silent? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched you, like the video, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more powerful stories like this.